The morning sun cast long shadows across the Afghan mountains as SEAL Team 7 moved through the rocky terrain like ghosts. Their mission was supposed to be routine reconnaissance, the kind they had done hundreds of times before. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison led his 8-man team with the confidence that came from 15 years of special operations experience. Behind him, his men moved in perfect formation, each one a highly trained killing machine who had survived countless missions in the world's most dangerous places. The intelligence briefing had been straightforward. A high-value target was reportedly hiding in a compound 3 kilometers from their current position. The target was believed to be a mid-level Taliban commander who had been responsible for several attacks on coalition forces. The plan was simple: observe, identify, and if the opportunity presented itself, eliminate the threat. What the briefing had not mentioned was Lena Gray. As the team reached their overwatch position on a ridge overlooking the compound, Morrison raised his hand, signaling the team to halt. Through his scope, he could see the typical mud-brick buildings that dotted the Afghan landscape. Smoke rose lazily from cooking fires, and a few goats wandered around the courtyard. Everything appeared normal, almost peaceful. Sergeant First Class Tommy Rodriguez, the team's sniper, had already set up his rifle and was scanning the area through his powerful scope. Next to him, Petty Officer First Class Mike Chen was monitoring radio frequencies, listening for any chatter that might indicate they had been spotted. The rest of the team had taken defensive positions around the ridge, creating a security perimeter. For the first 2 hours, nothing happened. This was the part of special operations that movies never showed. The waiting, the careful observation, the patience required to gather intelligence. Morrison had learned long ago that successful missions were often won in these quiet moments, when discipline and training separated elite forces from ordinary soldiers. It was Rodriguez who first spotted her. "Boss, we got movement in the compound," he whispered into his radio. Female, approximately 25 to 30 years old, moving between the buildings. Morrison adjusted his own scope and found the figure Rodriguez had identified. The woman was dressed in traditional Afghan clothing, but something about her movement caught his attention. She walked with purpose, not the cautious shuffle he had observed in local women who were constantly aware of Taliban restrictions on their behavior. "Keep eyes on her," Morrison ordered quietly. What happened next would be debated in classified debriefing rooms for years to come. The woman emerged from one of the buildings carrying what appeared to be a small bundle. As she walked across the courtyard, she looked directly at the ridge where SEAL Team 7 was positioned. For a moment, Morrison felt as though she was looking straight at him through his scope, which was impossible at that distance. Then she did something that sent a chill through every member of the team. She raised her right hand and made a series of quick gestures. Hand signals, military hand signals that any American Special Forces operator would recognize immediately. The signals were precise, deliberate, and unmistakably American in origin. "Did everyone see that?" Morrison whispered into his radio. The confirmations came back immediately. Every member of the team had witnessed the woman's signals, and every one of them understood what they had seen. Someone in that compound knew they were there, knew who they were, and was trying to communicate with them. Rodriguez kept his scope trained on the woman as she disappeared back into the building. "Boss, that was American military hand signals. No question about it." The implications were staggering. If there was an American in that compound, it changed everything. Was she a prisoner? A defector? An undercover operative? The mission parameters had suddenly become infinitely more complicated. Morrison made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Instead of calling for immediate backup or aborting the mission, he decided to gather more intelligence. The woman's presence raised too many questions to simply walk away. As the afternoon wore on, the team observed increased activity in the compound. Men with weapons moved in and out of the buildings, and Morrison counted at least 12 armed individuals. This was far more than the intelligence briefing had suggested, and the weapons they carried were not the typical AK-47 seconds favored by Taliban fighters. These men carried modern assault rifles, wore tactical gear, and moved with the discipline of trained soldiers. It was Chen who first picked up the radio transmissions. "Boss, I'm getting encrypted communications on military frequencies," he reported. "The encryption is sophisticated, not the kind of gear the Taliban usually has access to." Morrison felt a growing sense of unease. Nothing about this mission was matching their intelligence briefing, and the presence of the mysterious woman had introduced variables they were not prepared for. As the sun began to set, Rodriguez reported more movement in the compound. "Boss, our female subject is moving again. She's—" "Wait." The sniper's voice trailed off, and Morrison could hear the tension in his breathing over the radio. "Rodriguez, report." "Boss, she's looking directly at us again. And she's holding something." Through his scope, Morrison could see the woman standing in the center of the compound. In her hands was a small mirror, and she was using it to reflect the setting sun's rays directly at their position. The reflected light flashed 3 times, paused, then flashed twice more. Morse code. The message was simple, but impossible to ignore. Help. Every member of SEAL Team 7 understood that they were no longer dealing with a routine reconnaissance mission. An American woman was being held in that compound, and she was specifically asking for their help. But who was she? How did she know they were there? And why did her captors seem so well-equipped and organized? Morrison knew that his next decision would define not only the success of their mission but potentially the lives of his entire team. The rules of engagement were clear about civilian rescue operations, but those rules assumed they knew who they were rescuing and why. As darkness began to fall over the Afghan mountains, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison looked at his team and made a choice that would change all of their lives forever. They were going to find out exactly who Lena Gray was, even if it killed them. The woman in the compound had stopped signaling, but Morrison could still feel her presence like a weight on his conscience. Somewhere, in the darkness below, an American was waiting for rescue, and SEAL Team 7 was the only thing standing between her and whatever fate awaited her in that compound. What Morrison and his team could not know was that their decision to investigate further would lead them into a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government, involved secrets that were never meant to see the light of day, and forced them to confront the possibility that sometimes the most dangerous enemies were the ones who wore the same flag on their uniforms. The night was about to begin, and with it, a mission that would test everything they thought they knew about loyalty, duty, and the true cost of serving their country. The decision to move closer to the compound came at 0200 hours, during the darkest part of the night when human vision was at its weakest. Morrison divided his team into 2 groups. He would take Rodriguez, Chen, and Petty Officer Second Class Danny Walsh to approach the compound directly. The remaining 4 team members would maintain overwatch from the ridge, providing cover and communication relay back to base. Moving through the Afghan terrain at night required skills that took years to develop. Every step had to be calculated, every breath controlled. The team had trained for situations exactly like this, but training never fully prepared you for the real thing. Lives hung in the balance, and one mistake could mean death for all of them. As they moved down the rocky slope, Morrison's mind raced through possible scenarios. The woman's signals had been clear, but was this a trap? Had she been forced to signal for help to lure American forces into an ambush? The sophisticated equipment and trained fighters they had observed suggested this was no ordinary Taliban operation. Rodriguez moved like a shadow beside him, his rifle ready, but his primary focus on navigation. Behind them, Chen carried the team's communication equipment, maintaining constant contact with the Overwatch team. Walsh, the youngest member of their group, had volunteered for the mission despite Morrison's initial reluctance to bring him along. The compound was surrounded by a low stone wall, typical of Afghan rural architecture. As they reached the perimeter, Morrison could see that the earlier activity had died down. Only 2 guards were visible, both positioned at the main entrance. Through his night vision goggles, Morrison studied their equipment and posture. These men were definitely not typical Taliban fighters. Their gear was too clean, too modern, and their positioning showed tactical awareness that came from professional military training. Morrison had spent enough time in Afghanistan to recognize the difference between motivated amateurs and trained soldiers. These men fell into the latter category. Using hand signals, Morrison directed his team to positions around the compound. The plan was to observe and gather intelligence before making any decisions about extraction. They needed to know more about the woman, her captors, and why this situation existed in the first place. It was Walsh who made the discovery that changed everything. While moving to his assigned position, the young SEAL noticed something unusual about the vehicles parked inside the compound. Using his scope, he could make out license plates and vehicle identification numbers. But more importantly, he could see equipment inside one of the vehicles that made his blood run cold. American military communication equipment. Not just any equipment, but the latest generation encrypted radio systems that were classified and restricted to only the most sensitive operations. Walsh reported his findings to Morrison through whispered radio communication. The implications were immediate and terrifying. Either this equipment had been captured from American forces, or Americans were directly involved in whatever operation was taking place in this compound. Morrison made the decision to move closer to the buildings themselves. Using a drainage ditch that ran along the eastern wall, he was able to approach within 50 meters of the main structure. From this position, he could hear voices coming from inside. English voices. The conversation was muffled by the walls, but Morrison could make out enough words to understand that at least some of the people inside were native English speakers. This was not a Taliban operation. This was something else entirely. As Morrison strained to hear more of the conversation, a figure emerged from the building. It was the woman they had been observing. In the darkness, Morrison could see her more clearly through his night vision equipment. She was definitely not Afghan. Her features, her build, even the way she moved, suggested Western origins. She wore traditional Afghan clothing, but it seemed like a disguise rather than her natural dress. Most telling of all, she moved with the same tactical awareness that Morrison had noticed in the guards. The woman walked directly to the drainage ditch where Morrison was hidden. For a moment, Morrison thought he had been discovered and prepared to signal for immediate extraction. But instead of raising an alarm, the woman knelt down and appeared to be collecting water from the ditch. As she did so, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison, SEAL Team 7. Morrison felt his heart stop. She knew his name. She knew his unit designation. This was impossible unless she had access to classified information about their mission. "I know you're there," she continued, still pretending to collect water. "My name is Lena Gray, and I need you to listen carefully. Your mission briefing was wrong. This is not a Taliban operation. These men work for a private military contractor that has been conducting unauthorized operations in Afghanistan for the past 2 years. Morrison remained frozen in place, his mind struggling to process what he was hearing. How could she know about their mission briefing? How did she know his name? "I was part of a CIA operation to investigate these contractors," she continued. "But my cover was blown 3 weeks ago. I've been held here since then, and I believe they're planning to move me to a more secure location tomorrow." The implications of what Morrison was hearing were staggering. If this woman was telling the truth, then SEAL Team 7 had stumbled into a classified CIA operation. But if she was lying, then this could be the most sophisticated trap ever set for American Special Forces. Gray stood up from the ditch, still holding her container of water. "There's a communication device hidden in the well at the center of the compound. If you can access it, you'll find proof of what I'm telling you. But be careful. The contractor in charge goes by the name Viktor Kozlov, and he's former Russian Spetsnaz. He knows you're here." With that, she walked back toward the building, leaving Morrison with more questions than answers. Morrison immediately signaled for his team to withdraw to a safe distance while he processed this new information. If Gray was telling the truth about the communication device, it might provide the proof they needed to understand what was really happening. But accessing the well would require penetrating deeper into the compound, and if Kozlov really knew they were there, it could be a death trap. Back at their observation position, Morrison briefed his team on what had happened. The reactions were mixed. Rodriguez was skeptical, believing the entire encounter could be part of an elaborate trap. Chen was more open to the possibility that they had stumbled into a larger operation. Walsh, despite his inexperience, raised the most important question of all. "Boss, if she's CIA and this is a contractor operation, why weren't we briefed about it? Why would they send us on a mission that could compromise an ongoing intelligence operation?" It was a question that Morrison had been trying to avoid, but Walsh was right to ask it. Either their own command structure had been kept in the dark about the CIA operation, or SEAL Team 7 had been deliberately sent into a situation they were not supposed to survive. The possibility that their own government might have set them up was almost too terrible to contemplate, but Morrison had been in special operations long enough to know that such things were not impossible. Black operations, plausible deniability, and expendable assets were all part of the darker side of the intelligence world. As dawn approached, Morrison faced the most difficult decision of his military career. He could order his team to withdraw immediately, report what they had observed, and let higher command decide how to proceed. Or he could risk everything to gather the proof that Gray claimed was hidden in the compound. The sound of approaching helicopters made the decision for him. Through his binoculars, Morrison could see 3 helicopters approaching from the east. They were flying low and fast, using terrain-following patterns that suggested military pilots, but these were not American helicopters. The aircraft bore no identifying markings, and their design was clearly Russian in origin. As they approached the compound, Morrison could see armed men preparing to fast rope from the helicopters into the courtyard. "All units, this is Morrison," he whispered into his radio. "We have incoming aircraft, probable extraction operation." Gray was right. They're moving her. What happened next would test every aspect of their training and force Morrison to make choices that would define him for the rest of his life. The woman who called herself Lena Gray was about to be taken to a location where SEAL Team 7 would never find her, and with her would go the answers to questions that could shake the foundations of American foreign policy. Morrison looked at his men, knowing that whatever decision he made in the next few seconds would determine whether they all made it home alive. The helicopters were touching down in the compound, and time was running out. Morrison made his choice in the space between heartbeats. "All units, we're going in. Rodriguez, Walsh, with me. Chen, coordinate with Overwatch and call for immediate backup. Authorization code Sierra 7 Alpha." The authorization code he had just used was reserved for situations where SEAL teams encountered threats that exceeded their mission parameters. Using it would bring immediate attention from the highest levels of command, but Morrison no longer cared about protocol. American lives were at stake, and the web of deception surrounding this mission had grown beyond anything he could handle alone. The 3 SEALs moved toward the compound as the unmarked helicopters settled into the courtyard. Through his scope, Morrison could see armed men in black tactical gear emerging from the aircraft. Their movements were professional and coordinated, confirming Gray's assessment that these were not ordinary mercenaries. Rodriguez took position behind a low stone wall that provided a clear line of sight to the compound's entrance. His job was to provide covering fire and eliminate any threats that emerged. Walsh, despite his relative inexperience, had proven himself capable under pressure and would serve as backup for Morrison's direct approach to the well. As Morrison moved closer to the compound wall, he could hear shouting in English and what sounded like Russian. The voices were urgent, suggesting that something had gone wrong with their extraction plan. Through gaps in the stone wall, Morrison caught glimpses of the activity in the courtyard. Lena Gray was being forcibly escorted toward one of the helicopters by 2 men in black gear. Even from a distance, Morrison could see that she was resisting, making their job as difficult as possible. But what struck him most was her tactical awareness. Every movement she made seemed designed to slow down the extraction and provide opportunities for intervention. Morrison reached the well at the center of the compound, just as the first helicopter began spooling up its engines. The stone structure was ancient, probably centuries old, and finding a hidden communication device seemed impossible. But as Morrison examined the stonework more carefully, he noticed that one section looked newer than the rest. Using his knife, Morrison was able to pry loose several stones, revealing a waterproof container wedged into a crevice. Inside the container was a military-grade communication device and a data storage unit that looked like it contained substantial amounts of information. As Morrison secured the device, he heard the distinctive crack of Rodriguez's sniper rifle. Through his radio, he heard Rodriguez's calm voice report, "Tango down." They're moving toward the helicopters faster now. The extraction was accelerating, and Morrison realized he was running out of time to discover the truth about Lena Gray and the operation she had stumbled into. He activated the communication device and was immediately connected to an encrypted channel. "Raven's Nest, this is Grey Wolf," came a voice over the radio. "Package is compromised and extraction is under fire. Requesting immediate support." Morrison keyed the radio and identified himself. "This is Lieutenant Commander Morrison, SEAL Team 7. "Who is this?" There was a moment of silence before the voice responded. "Commander, this is Colonel Sarah Martinez, Joint Special Operations Command. Lena Gray is one of our deep cover operatives investigating illegal arms sales to terrorist organizations. The contractors holding her are selling American military equipment to the highest bidder, including known terrorist groups." The revelation hit Morrison like a physical blow. Lena Gray was not just CIA. She was military intelligence, and the operation she had been investigating involved the sale of American weapons to the very enemies that SEALs like Morrison risked their lives fighting. "Colonel, we have Gray in sight, and the contractors are attempting extraction via helicopter. What are your orders?" "Commander, that operation cannot be allowed to succeed. Gray has evidence of weapon sales that go to the highest levels of the defense contracting industry. If she disappears, that evidence disappears with her." Morrison understood the implications immediately. This was not just about saving one operative. This was about preventing a cover-up that could compromise American security for years to come. "Walsh, Rodriguez, new mission parameters," Morrison radioed to his team. "We're preventing that helicopter from leaving with the package." What followed was the most intense firefight of Morrison's career. As SEAL Team 7 engaged the contractors, it became clear that these men were indeed former special forces from various countries. Their tactics were sound, their equipment was excellent, and they fought with the skill of professionals. But they had made one critical mistake. They had underestimated the determination of American SEALs operating on home ground with clear mission objectives. Rodriguez's sniper fire kept the helicopter crews pinned down, preventing immediate takeoff. Walsh had managed to work his way around to the compound's rear entrance and was engaging contractors who were trying to establish a defensive perimeter. Morrison himself had taken position near the well, using the ancient stone structure as cover while coordinating the team's movements. The breakthrough came when Chen, monitoring radio communications from the Overwatch position, intercepted a transmission that revealed the true scope of the contractor operation. The group was not just selling weapons. They were providing intelligence about American military operations to foreign buyers, essentially acting as traders while hiding behind the cover of legitimate defense contracting. "Boss, you need to hear this," Chen's voice crackled over the radio. "I'm intercepting communications between the contractors and someone they're calling Control. They're discussing the sale of information about SEAL team movements in Afghanistan." "Our movements, boss. They've been tracking us." Morrison felt a cold fury wash over him. These contractors had not just stumbled into conflict with SEAL Team 7. They had been actively working against American interests, potentially contributing to the deaths of American soldiers through the intelligence they sold. The moral clarity of the situation changed everything. This was no longer a complicated intelligence operation with unclear objectives. This was Americans fighting traitors, and Morrison knew exactly what needed to be done. The final phase of the battle was swift and decisive. Using tactics perfected through years of training and combat experience, SEAL Team 7 systematically dismantled the contractor force. Rodriguez eliminated the helicopter pilots before they could lift off, stranding the extraction team on the ground. Walsh and Morrison coordinated an assault that forced the contractors to abandon their defensive positions. In the end, Viktor Kozlov, the former Russian Spetsnaz soldier who had been leading the operation, found himself facing Morrison in single combat near the compound's main building. The fight was brief but brutal, ending when Morrison's superior training and righteous anger overcame Kozlov's experience and ruthlessness. Lena Gray was free, but more importantly, the evidence she had gathered was preserved. The data storage device Morrison had retrieved, from the well-contained proof of weapon sales, intelligence sharing, and financial transactions that implicated defense contractors, foreign agents, and even some American officials in a conspiracy that threatened national security. As backup arrived in the form of additional SEAL units and military intelligence personnel, Morrison finally had the opportunity to speak privately with Lena Gray. "Who are you really?" he asked. Gray removed the headscarf she had been wearing, revealing short blonde hair and piercing blue eyes. "Major Lena Gray. Military intelligence. I've been undercover for 8 months, tracking this network. They were getting close to exposing American operatives in several countries, and people were going to die if I didn't stop them." Morrison studied her face, seeing the exhaustion and strain of months spent maintaining a dangerous cover identity. "How did you know we were coming?" "I didn't," she admitted. "But when I saw your team on the ridge, I recognized the opportunity. I'd been trying to find a way to get the evidence out, and you were my chance." The aftermath of the operation would take months to fully unfold. The evidence Gray had gathered led to the arrest of 12 defense contractors, the exposure of a foreign intelligence network operating on American soil, and reforms in how military equipment sales were monitored and controlled. For SEAL Team 7, the mission became the stuff of legend within the special operations community. They had turned a routine reconnaissance mission into a counterintelligence operation that saved American lives and exposed a threat to national security. But for Morrison, the most important outcome was simpler. An American operative had asked for help, and his team had answered that call. In a world where moral clarity was often elusive, that simple truth was enough. Lena Gray returned to her work in military intelligence, but with a new assignment focused on domestic security threats. The experience had shown that America's enemies were not always foreign, and sometimes the most dangerous threats came from those who wore American uniforms while serving foreign masters. Years later, when Morrison was asked to describe the mission that had defined his career, he would say that it taught him the difference between following orders and serving his country. Sometimes, those two things were not the same, and when that happened, a soldier had to choose what mattered more: protocol or principle. SEAL Team 7 had chosen principle, and America was safer because of that choice. In the end, that was what being a SEAL really meant: being willing to risk everything to protect something greater than yourself.